Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CS Leadership Roundtable. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of SuccessHACKER and our Success Coaching Training Program. Thanks for joining us for our inaugural monthly live leadership roundtable. Today, discussing how we've helped customer success teams build, evolve, and solve their organizational challenges. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training with more than 4,000 graduates across more than 60 countries. Our popular virtual instructor-led training boot camps run monthly. We offer 12-week coaching programs 3 times a year, and we have a number of standalone courses all taught by industry experts. Later this quarter, we're rolling out our level 5 of our CCSM curriculum and a number of new virtual instructor-led programs, including change management for customer success and having difficult conversations. Later this year, we'll also be releasing a management track for new and seasoned customer success leaders, so look out for those. With the new year, we're also making a slight change to the format of our webinars. The new running time will be 75 minutes. We'll get through the meat of the content and into the Q&A, but we decided to extend to allow for more questions. Typically, we're only able to get through about half of the questions that we get, and from the feedback we've gotten, the Q&A aspect of these sessions is quite popular. Anyone that needs to leave at the top of the hour, feel free to do so. As always, we'll be posting this recording and transcription on our website, but our panelists will be sticking around until a quarter past the hour for anyone who wants to keep the conversation going. You can find out more and sign up for our events at successcoaching.co. Scroll to the bottom of the page and click on the events link. For those of you that haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic relevant to customer success leaders. This right here is the only script that I follow during the entire webinar. Regardless of the company you work for, the details of your customer-facing role, or the size of the customers that you deal with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. We also encourage you to suggest topics you'd like to hear about. If you have a suggestion, please direct message me on LinkedIn. The schedule for our upcoming Leadership Roundtable events, along with a whole bunch of other resources and content, can be found at successcoaching.co. So please check that out. And as I mentioned, we'll post a replay of this webinar along with a transcription early next week on our website. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those out in the wild that are practicing customer success on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people who are great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and perspectives. We will be taking questions later on during the webcast, so please use that Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. Now, because we're doing something a bit different with today's session, instead of me doing the facilitating, we've asked our friend and partner, Jay Nathan, Chief Customer Officer at HireLogic and founder of the very popular Gain, Grow, Retain online community, to help us out. Jay, welcome, and thanks for making time for us. Also joining us today are my partners, Todd Eby and Aaron Thompson. So at this point, Jay, I'm going to turn it all over to you, my friend. So let's get to the topic at hand.
Sounds great, Andrew, and thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and good to see you all. I see a lot of familiar faces here in the on the webinar, so great to see you. And I'm really excited because I get to sit here and be a facilitator and a moderator for 3 of the most brilliant guys in customer success. So we always have a lot of fun together too. So looking forward to sharing that with you all today. So the topic today is really cool. So these guys, the SuccessHACKER guys, Andrew, Todd, and Aaron, have decided to open source and essentially give away some materials and some IP that they've been working on for years now, right, guys? And so the practices of customer success have been evolving rapidly, particularly over the past decade. And you're starting to see some patterns emerge, some patterns in how to structure things, patterns that apply whether you're serving large customers or small or mid-sized customers, whether you're an earlier stage startup or a late stage public company. a lot of these same patterns can be applied in the way that it makes sense for your business to do that. So I'm excited to dig into this with you guys. But let's start at the top. So you decided to call this SquareONE. So the methodology is called SquareONE. Todd, why don't you tell us a little bit about the SquareONE methodology, how you guys came up with it, why'd you decide to name it that?
Sure. So when we were basically putting together our methodology early on, Andrew and I were trying to coalesce two different sort of approaches that were very similar, but we used a whole different sort of nomenclature, and we approached things from different aspects that we thought were important. And so the one thing that really held it all together, though, is we realized as we were working with clients that we always kind of had to pull everybody back to the start. And so we had to go back to square one to really get them to start rethinking how they looked at operationalizing their customer success efforts. And so, the name just sort of stuck, and it made sense because, of course, there's a square graphic that goes along with it, and so, it all kind of hung together. But it also, was sort of it was this fundamental thing that folks just kept missing. They were challenged by not looking at their problems as a system. So they weren't applying a systems thinking based approach to it. They were taking linear thought. And really what it devolved down to was they were facing these challenges, and I don't want to say it was all their fault, but they were playing whack-a-mole, right? They were assuming that if I change this one aspect, it's going to cascade through the rest of what I do. And they weren't taking this sort of holistic approach. And so we always had to kind of pull them back and say, like, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go to square one. Why are we doing this? What's involved? And so, the name just kind of came out of that. And, the methodology itself, as I alluded to earlier, it was, sort of the culmination of the work both he and I had done separately. And, this goes back, what now, like probably
20, almost 20 years, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's based off of 20 years of us working in these types of roles.
Space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sad thing is, yes, we've worked together for actually over 20 years, give or take. And the nice thing was that we could take all that experience and kind of put it on paper in one methodology that was, to our way of thinking, pretty easy to follow. I think that some of the folks that went through my alpha version of the training on this might differ a little bit on that, because it does get pretty hairy pretty fast. But that was how we got to the name of SquareONE.
That's cool. And so I want to dig into a little bit of we're not going to go through in detail today of all the little bits and bytes and pieces and parts of this, but I want people to understand what it is that you're going to be making public here. But so why don't we dig into that a little bit? Like, what are the big pieces of this thing, and how are they designed to help organizations like many folks on this call are find themselves in today?
So what we're going to do, and instead of throwing a bunch of graphics up and making it really confusing, people are going to be trying to associate it all together. We're going to kind of stick to the high level piece, and then in terms of rolling this out, we're going to start with the blueprint, which is sort of core to it. And I'll speak to that in just a second. And then we'll roll out the different elements that go into it, because there's an overarching framework, and then there are a lot of different tools. And just like, any good, journeyman or, professional builder, right? Like, you have the right tool for the right situation, and you probably will use a lot of them, but you might not use all of them. So explaining the entire ecosystem would get, as I mentioned before, very hairy. So, for the purposes of today, what we're going to really stick to is sort of the SquareONE methodology itself and the different pieces that go into that, and how it relates to our Customer Success Accelerator framework, which is really a simple tool that we created to try and explain to folks that were getting lost, why we approach things the way that we do, and then I'll talk to the blueprint. But underneath the blueprint itself is a series of tools like the Customer Success Engagement Blueprint. There's the Customer Success Strategy Canvas. There are things like an execution framework. There's a playbook builder. There's just a host of things that you can bring to bear on the situation. But it really all comes down to, first and foremost, understanding where you're at and where you want to be. And then some of the ancillary things that we inject into that is, as I alluded to in my earlier commentary, we give folks a grounding in systems thinking so that they start to understand why we're approaching things the way that we do, because linear thought is going to get you into several dead ends. And it's also going to have you playing, as I mentioned earlier, whack-a-mole, where you're trying to solve a problem, but because it is in a system and other things are interacting with it, you can't simply change that one thing and have the broad reaching impact that you're expecting. And then we'll also be talking a bit more about Agile. A few years back, I premiered the Accelerator framework, and I talked a lot about Agile customer success. And those things are sort of core to the approach that we take. But the blueprint is what really pulls it all together. And, it's not like some of the other blueprints that you might see out there where, I often refer to them as like blog level content, right? Like in 750 words or less, here's your blueprint. And they just don't go deep. And that's always been one of the things that holds us back, is that a lot of the thought leadership that's out there and a lot of the things that have been sort of held forth as the must reads and must understands are all about the why and the what. But when it comes to kind of getting to the how, it's, it falls flat, right? Like there's just enough to make you feel like you got it. And then when you start to try and use it, all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, like what do I do now?
A lot of unanswered questions here. Yeah.
Yeah. The blueprint really, we strove to make it paint by numbers. And the reason for that is sort of at the core of why we moved away from consulting and went to education, because as we did so many engagements using this methodology, what we really realized was that we were spending 80% of our time teaching, because our goal always was to not have like the Accenture level engagement where we were there for 2 years. We wanted to get in, really diagnose the challenges and get people to wrap their heads around it, and then give them a path forward, but teach them how to do it themselves. Because as all the leaders on this call know, right? Like if you don't embody what you've done, if you don't really have it at the DNA level, and you're relying on some, third party to help guide you through it, you end up not being able to evolve as your business changes. And let's face it, like if you're not changing the way that you do things in some meaningful way, probably every 6 to 9 months, you're behind. And so we really shifted to more of this education-based approach, and then more of a coaching aspect, sort of like what you would see with Agile coaches, where I'm not going to do the work for you. I'm not going to wrangle your developers. I'm going to point out that, hey, you might want to look at this a little bit more deeply, and that's the role of a good coach. And we found by doing that, when we worked with clients, they were really successful, they were really happy, and they were able to follow exactly what we had laid out with them in terms of their action path using the blueprint. And they were off to the races. And then, as they hit those changes in their business and the changes in the size of their organization, et cetera, they could take it in stride because they knew where they needed to go, and they knew the different actors in the system that they had to basically contend with. And so they were better equipped to move forward.
We actually passed up opportunities with prospects who said, we want you to do this all for us. Well, that's not, that you might be good for 6-9 months, but you need to understand what's going on here, right? You need to grok it. We'll help you lay out a plan, right? But this needs to be a collaborative thing. And ultimately you need to carry the torch here. And we will help you as your coach to make sure that you get it across the finish line and you're continuing to produce, you're continuing to evolve. But customer success is not like a Ronco oven that you buy at midnight on TV. It's not set it and forget it. It's something that constantly needs to evolve. And while that may be enticing for some consultants, hey, I can back up a truck and unload a bunch of consultants, it was definitely not part of our strategy or way of thinking.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I mean, we met because I was in a consulting business that's very similar at some point. But even the larger organizations that we worked with, they didn't really have the time or the attention span to have people from the outside come in and help them try to figure that out on their own either. So I would say even if you did have a truck full of consultants, it probably wouldn't have been a good fit for this kind of business in this market. But one of the things I wanted to dig into, so one of the challenges that I think we all have at various points when we join new companies, or maybe when we're taking over additional teams as part of the customer success organizations, or when we're trying to build a customer success organization, is explaining it to the rest of the business. And what I've found is that having documented customer journeys and a documented Racy Matrix, having tools that help show visually and not just have slides with a bunch of words on them or documents with a bunch of words, help tremendously in terms of getting the point across to the management team who need to be aligned with what you're doing for you to be successful as a customer success leader. So Andrew, I don't know if you can speak a little bit to how folks can use these tools to help create alignment within their organizations to help drive the kinds of structures and organization that they need to put in place to be successful.
Well, one tool in particular, the Customer Success Engagement Blueprint, which is a very expanded Racy Matrix. For those of you that are familiar with Racy, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. The reason that it was originally built in Google Sheets was very much for collaboration, right? It needs to be something that we collaborate on and that everybody understands, right? Everybody understands what everybody else is doing, right? How can we deliver success if the person that sits next to me that's in a different department doesn't understand how we're going to move that customer to their desired outcome? And I personally experienced this. There was one client in particular that jumps out at me. Smaller company. I went in and did a workshop with them. It was a very long 12-hour workshop that we did, and they were early stage or relatively. I think they were round B. But the location that I went to, they had one of those large room folding tables. Everybody's sitting across from one another, and I pulled everybody into their boardroom. Pulled people from all the different organizations into the boardroom, and we sat there and talked about the different elements that make up customer success. And that is not just about post-sales, it's about pre-sales. How are we acquiring them? What expectations are we setting in the marketing, in the sales? What's the handoff like? And then let's talk about that post-sales experience. What happens in the onboarding and the enablement and the adoption? And there are people there, and as they're explaining what they do, there are people that are sitting next to them that sit next to them in this room, but also sit next to them out on the floor and said, "Oh, I didn't realize you did that." Right. And I'm thinking, well, how can you be effective at helping your customers achieve what they're trying to do when your own folks inside in your organization don't know what each other does? And that's where that Racy Matrix and the collaborative nature of that and the sharing of that is so important.
Racy Matrix is a very consultancy term, Andrew. So, like for the unindoctrinated here, like let's kill the jargon. Like let's talk real. Like what does Racy mean? What does it mean to be responsible versus accountable for something, right? How does that work in the real world for all of us Earthlings?
Todd, do you have something, Todd?
I said Earthlings, Andrew.
Yeah.
The way I like to talk about it is the way I like to describe the Racy Matrix is like this. So when you're building a house, your architect may design a 3D relief of what you think the house is going to look like. Right? We can compare that to a customer journey. Right? Here's the strategy of what we're trying to achieve, and the path that we want the customer to take. Right. But then there's the tactical. How do we actually do it? And that's where the architect builds a set of plans for the contractor. Right. Here's where the walls are going to be. Here's where the plumbing is going to be. Here's how we're going to we're going to build this vision. Right. And the Racy Matrix is a set of tactical steps where we identify all of the different actors, whether it's internal or external, and what they're responsible for. What am I responsible for something getting done versus being accountable for something getting done? So if I'm accountable, the buck stops with me, but I may be accountable, but I may not be responsible for it. And then consulted, of course, is just like it sounds. I'm going to consult with somebody, and informed is I'm just going to tell somebody about something. And this thing is laid out in sections for each of the major steps that we're going to take. And it's divided up into the three phases of the customer life cycle as we've defined them. There's the customer acquisition phase, and then the onboarding phase, and then what we refer to as the final phase, which is EARN. And EARN is an acronym for Enable, Adopt, Renew, and Navigate.
I like that. That's great. Todd, I think I cut you off. You were going to jump in here as well.
No worries. So I was just going to go back to one of the things that you said that I think is really important, and that's, so you can be designing the Sistine Chapel, right? Like, you can be creating this incredible strategy and program, but a lot of where folks struggle is explaining what they're doing and why. And so, the Racy Matrix, the Customer Success Enablement Blueprint, the Engagement Blueprint, those are all like really good tools, along with like the strategy canvas and the blueprint. And at the core of them, the reason why they're important and why we created them was, by and large, it means that you can get what you're going to talk about onto a single sheet of paper. And that is sort of something that's often overlooked by a lot of folks when it comes to what they're doing when they build something. It's not just the act of building it. It's also your ability to explain what you're doing and why, and to be able to do that in a manner that is easy to understand and engages the attention of the folks that you're explaining it to. And so, sort of the reason why that rationale is like so crystal, like it's not a must-have, it's an imperative. Because I want you all to think about the last time that you tried to explain something to your CEO without a simple visual, right? Like, it just doesn't work. And if you can't explain to somebody because they're not in it day to day, and you're having to make hand motions and point to this, and you've got to draw this big, elaborate thing up on the board, you're already on your back foot, right? Like, when you're having these conversations, when you're trying to explain what you're doing and why, and where perhaps a challenge exists, if it's not simple, if it doesn't just highlight what you're driving at and why you're doing it, then you're already, at risk of failing entirely. And so, everything that we put together really at its basic fundamental level is designed to make things easier to explain, because it's not just the CEO. If you want the folks that you're leading to buy into what you're doing, they have to understand it too. And they have to feel like they're a part of it, and they have to be able to see how it all holds together. And I've seen some folks, when we do these engagements and they're going to do the read-in for us to tell us what they've already done, they bring out this 155 slide PowerPoint deck. And, it's just insane. And, by the end of it, you're like, I still don't feel like I understand what you're doing. There was a lot of good
plan.
pictures. Yeah. And so, if you look at the way that we approach things, it's about getting the plan on paper, but getting it on paper in a way that people can interact with it. So, Andrew mentioned that the engagement blueprint is a sheet, right? Like Google Sheet, very portable, easy to share and collaborate with. The blueprint itself is not, a four-page marketing thing. It's a Trello board, and it's broken up into, just a host of different lists with cards, and underneath the cards are a set of checklists. And it's basically built, like everything we built is designed to be utilized in an agile manner. So all of the blueprint, the idea was that you could take it and convert it into an agile backlog, and you could start working through it, and you could see the burn down as you were starting to implement things and how they were progressing. Because one of the other big challenges you have is you design this amazing thing, and then you have to give updates. And so all of a sudden your CEO is like, well, where are we at? And why are we behind? And what are we doing? And one of the things that I think a lot of leaders struggle with is, they got to keep their eye on the prize, right? But at the same time, they've got to go and put out all the little fires that happen around them. And so, one of the things that was also at the core of this approach was that we wanted to give folks a way to basically be able to firewall off a certain portion of their time so that they could say, we're going to work on this. We have this amount of time available to us, for this sprint, whether it be a week or 3 weeks, wherever they land on that. And then they're able to say like, okay, we're doing this. And then if all of a sudden things change, well, they can update their plan. They can read back to, their leadership and say, hey, we decided to go in a new strategic direction. And because of that, we're going to have to shift our schedule. And so it was also this, I don't want to say CYA measure, but it covered your ass a bit, because you were able to point directly to how switches in attention, focus, and priority were going to impact your ability to make the changes that you were promising that were eventually going to hit on the things that, the leadership cared about. Like, you tell me you want to reduce churn. Okay, great. Here's like the 10 things that we're doing, and here's all the different places that we're touching it. Here's how long it's going to take, and here's our plan to get there. Well, you can accomplish all those things. And if something suddenly changes, you're able to say, so hold on, we've got to refactor now because we've made some changes. Here's what it's going to look like going forward. And that prevented you from having these conversations that were like ambushes where they're like, you're not done. Why aren't you done? Like, I want to see action. And all of a sudden it's, this like run around with your hair on fire.
So what I'm hearing from you, Todd, is you need a plan, you need alignment around the plan, and then you've actually got to have some way to communicate out the status of what you're implementing in the plan, right? So I want to kick this one over to Aaron. Actually, I feel like, Aaron, you're the youngest brother at the table, and you're fighting for the scraps here, man. But how does this relate? There's a lot of technology coming to bear in the space as well, right? We've got a lot of vendors, a lot of great technology out there focused directly on customer success teams. Like, is this the methodology you guys use to implement customer success? Does it compare in any way, shape, and form to the technology that sits behind it?
Well, thanks for opening up a minute here and getting me a table stake of moment to talk here, Jay. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your contribution.
He has the same problem on our stand-ups.
Like every stand-up. Yeah. I mean, this is, Jay, it's great to see you. I see Todd and Andrew all the time, but it's great to see you, buddy. Okay. So let's talk about just like leadership in general. We've seen this. It's well documented. The average lifespan of a customer success leader is about 18 months, right? They come in, they're tasked with fixing the churn problem. And sometimes they have budget for a big fancy tool that they think is going to solve all their problems. Other times they don't, like myself. When I was the head of customer success the first time, we didn't have a budget for any CS platforms. I was lucky to just be able to scrap it together and try to operationalize what we were doing. But when you look at that and why is it such a short lifespan for most heads of and leaders in the CS world? And I think a lot of it goes back to what Todd and Andrew were just talking about around cross-departmental needs. And to really fix the churn problem, you got to be working with marketing and sales and product. And you can't just be a hero at the bottom of the funnel, saving the day and, like 11th hour getting the renewals, and all of that reactive firefighting and actually fix a churn problem. The churn problem starts way earlier in the customer expectations around, or in their life cycle around their expectations. And so what we see is leader after leader comes in and they get these tools, right? And what they're approaching, how they're approaching customer success is just, it's flawed from square one. They're approaching it as a technology problem to be fixed within their business. And this is in fact not a technology problem, it's a people problem that needs to be fixed within their business. And if you don't have budget for a big fancy tool, there's still a ton of things you can do, just like I did in my first experience. Again, I mean, I wish I would have loved to have had a tool like this when I was stepping in and literally hired to do exactly that, fix the churn problem. And they expected with my support background that I'd be able to do that heroic stuff at the bottom of the funnel. Luckily, I had been to a few conferences and read a few books and realized I don't have a chance to do that if I can't affect how we market our product and ultimately how we actually sell our product, so that we can create outcome alignment with what we're doing and stop looking at the business the way that we had been and start changing gears to a more customer-centric culture and approach. This tool and this, you know, the whole blueprint in general would have really helped me know where to start. Number one, it'd be like a, you know, shortcut to, all right, here, I've got something to use. No budgetary restraint, no real huge implications like you would have if you deploy a CS technology platform without a sound strategy, similar to deploying a marketing automation tool, but not knowing how to market and who you're going to market to and why. It's not going to be very successful. Same thing with what we see. You know, we see that all the time in CS. Yeah. And these poor leaders, 18 months later, they're back out looking for the next company because they weren't able to fix the churn problem, because they didn't fix the actual problem. It's a people problem, and that's what this blueprint helps align, is how to fix that people problem, which really is at its core why we exist. Operationalizing process, procedure, workflow management. Then we can look at tools and larger impact of a CS platform once we've already got it firing on all cylinders from the people perspective. So looking back, I mean, I didn't develop this framework with Todd and Andrew, but looking back at my career, I sure wish I had it 5-6 years ago when I was the head of for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember my first time as a customer success leader, I was, you know, the term ham and egging comes to mind. I don't know if everybody knows that term or not. I'm not a golfer, so I had to learn that from my buddy Jeff. But you know, you're putting it together. You're piecing it together over time. So just as a quick reminder for all those that are on the webinar, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A section, and we'll go ahead and start answering those now in the midst of the conversation here. But Josh asked a good question about can we see examples of the resources that are being discussed that'd help everybody visualize them. So can maybe Andrew, can you talk to the plan for like what we're going to do to release these?
Well, I'll throw something up, and then we can talk about the plan.
Okay. Why don't we show it? You know, just
I have the Trello board, and I have the CSEB that we can show people, but there's a lot behind these. So I don't want you to think I can take a snapshot and we're good to go. There's a lot more to it. So
yeah. So what I'm going to share up on the screen.
Oh, you got it. Okay, cool.
Everybody should be able to see it. So, you know, the core of what we talked about was SquareONE, which is up here in the top left-hand corner. And really, I mean, it's all common sense, right? Like that's the thing that is critical for folks to understand. This is not something that is going to revolutionize the way that you think about customer success. I'd love to say that that's what this would do, and maybe it will for some. But ultimately, you know, when we talk about what we're doing and what we're going to share with you, this is the core of it. This is the blueprint. And then, you know, there are various other pieces that go in, you know, and obviously, like, it all starts by understanding that what we're talking about is a complex system. And so there are really 4 key elements in that system from our perspective, which are the people, the processes, the strategy, and the systems. And you can see that people and systems are sort of diametrically opposed. And the reason for that, and the thing that we highlight in the Customer Success Accelerator framework, which is immediately below it, which is sort of that pyramid, we look at building that pyramid up, and you can see that systems are at the top. That's like the pinnacle. And what SquareONE really espouses is, let's get back to the fundamentals. Let's really look at what have you done in terms of your people aspect? So that's, the mission, the culture, the purpose, the strategy. Does everybody understand, why they're here, what we're attempting to accomplish, the strategy that we're using to get there? And, are we true to our purpose? If the sole reason why our department has been instantiated is to stop churn, then that's the focus that we're all on. And it's, counterproductive to take on other things. Now that's a very, polarizing example, but oftentimes what we saw was that the mission and the purpose of the team was counter to what senior leadership actually wanted to do. Let me give you an example. Like, we want to give you the mission was, we want to give you the absolute best experience possible. Yet, when you go back to the team, they didn't have any budget. They weren't given any access to tools. There was, 5 people, and they were selling a product direct to consumer, and they had hundreds of thousands of customers. So there was no way for them to really deliver on that mission, that purpose, based on sort of where they were at. And so if your fundamentals, if the very base of the pyramid doesn't align with, reality, then the rest of it doesn't matter. It's a moot point.
So Todd, can I interject here for a second? So one of the things I think is really important for all of us as customer success leaders to be focused on is the business objective, right? Yes, there's the purpose of the organization. There's the outcome that our customers are trying to achieve. But the way that you get things done internally with your executive team, with your board, the way that you garner investment for this type of work is by connecting it to the business results. So can you guys maybe talk a little bit about how you think about aligning with company objectives, whether it's a sales target or a retention renewal target like we have this year, every year, or whether you're trying to build brand advocates? Like, how do you think about those big, chunky company objectives as it relates to a starting point with these tools?
One of the first questions I always ask when someone poses this sort of a question and it's part of an engagement was, do you guys utilize Balance Scorecard? Is there some sort of way that you're measuring the core things that matter to your business? And then if you are using BSC or something analogous to it, is there a strategy map? Have you broken down how you view the actions that I am going to take, and how are they going to impact that measure that you feel is so fundamental? And so if you don't have like a balanced scorecard and a strategy map, if your company's not that mature, we bring something like that to bear to help break down the challenge that you're facing, and to look for these cases where there's a lack of alignment. And so the goal is going in one direction and what we're expected to do is going in another. So, that's at the core of it, that's kind of fundamental. And one of the things that we do to sort of diagnose that is, and you can see it right here as sort of the first view that I've given you, is we basically recommend that you do a SWOT analysis of where you're at. Like, understanding where you're starting from is super important, right? And one of the things that you would be highlighting if there is that lack of alignment is a weakness, right? Or a threat to, you being able to achieve your measures. But the way that folks would measure it, I would recommend the Balance Scorecard. I mean, it's a well-documented methodology. It's very concise. And, most CEOs are going to be familiar with it, especially if they went to business school. That's pretty much like a required text around from Kaplan on BSC and strategy mapping.
I mean, you need to be able to decompose those company objectives, those corporate objectives, and figure out, okay, what's my role? What's my piece in that? And let's make sure that everybody understands, the role that I'm going to play in that, the impact, not that we should have, but that we can have given what we have to start with.
What's SWOT stand for those of us who are not consultants?
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Okay, there you go.
Your strengths and weaknesses are typically internally facing. Your opportunities and threats are typically externally facing.
So it strikes me as you guys talk about that, like thinking about starting from the business objectives and working your way backward, it's a lot like what we ask our customer success managers to do. So in essence, the product that you're putting in is this part of your customer experience, which is how your teams and processes are aligned to engage and deliver and sort of work with your customers that drives the business outcome of renewal, revenue growth, advocacy growth, and that sort of thing. So, but Andrew, can you dig into more of this roles and responsibilities thing? Because I think this is something that I see a lot of in my own past work, in my own company, but it's really important to know who's doing what, and not everybody has to be responsible for a certain kind of outcome, but many people are accountable for it. I'll give you one example, and maybe you could critique me on this, but our customer success team in 2021 are going to be accountable for our customer renewals, but they're not responsible for executing the renewal. They're responsible for a set of adoption and customer engagement and relationship building and best practices activities that we know are going to lead to renewals. So is that,
they're responsible for creating the environment of a renewal to happen. They're responsible for, they may not be responsible for, they're not necessarily accountable for moving the renewal through the actual renewal process. But their job, their responsibility is, I want to create an environment where I mitigate the risk of a renewal not happening, that I reduce the friction. And if we've done all of the things up in the funnel, higher up in the funnel that play into the customer achieving value and getting value out of the solution and achieving their desired outcomes, then we can assume that we've teed things up really well to mitigate the risk of this renewal occurring.
And I would actually take it another step further and argue that, an operationalized CS org and a proficient customer success leader and by default their team, we should be able to predict churn. We should be able to see it coming. It shouldn't be a surprise when we lose a customer. If it is, it means our health score is out of whack, our voice of the customer is out of whack. Like the whole thing might be out of whack if we get, broadsided by some churn. We should be able to see it. Now, we obviously want to try to prevent it and get out ahead of it and do all those kind of remediation plays. But, it's not just even a matter of setting up the right environment. There might be times where I've had customers where I swear they hit every single bug in the product. They're on the product for years. And it was like, they were just jinxed. We saw that churn coming just from a product circumstantial use case value prop situation. But we saw it coming, and we weren't even doing customer success. So in the CS world, we really shouldn't be surprised. We should be able to predict what that retention rate is going to look like, and then hopefully surpass it.
Well, and then back to Aaron's original point about how it's not a systems problem. We should be ensuring, and what this methodology does is it helps to move you closer to ensuring that the right people are doing the right things in the right ways at the right times. Right. And by tracking those actions as leading indicators, that should be able to inform us of what direction we're going with the customer. So back to Aaron's point, predict churn or predict a renewal.
And you got to be able to enable these people, right? And you have to go through some education. You got to get some sort of industry best practices and, outside, maybe you just do it all in-house. But however you do it, you can't just hire CSMs, give them a big fancy tool and say, why did you not save the day? It puts them in an impossible position as an individual contributor. And then a year and a half to 2 years later, that leader's out looking for their next role because they never really enabled those people. They never educated them and got them the right tools to be successful. Set them up.
You just went back to a point that I was going to bring us back to too at the top. Andrew mentioned that the average customer success leader is in role for 18 to 24 months. So let's get real practical like there's some inputs that you got to go get as a leader to put into a framework like this. This is going to guide you. It's not going to do it for you in the same way that a tool won't. So what practical guidance can we use? Like my first 30 days in the job as a customer success leader, what are those things that I should be doing? Like the actual activities that I should be doing with my customers, with my team, to go figure out what some of the inputs are to put in this framework that you guys are open sourcing. So Aaron, I'll kick it to you first.
You kick it to me? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna defer to them because I've got my own experience, but so I'll just come into Fortel, fix the churn problem. First thing I had to do was segmentation. I had to figure out up and down and left and right of our customer landscape and understand who the most important ones were and have reasons why, and then all the way down to the tech touch, no touch, whatever. And from there, we could start making heads and tails of what's going on from a customer experience perspective. Because generally speaking, those high touch, in our case, we were lucky, very successful customers, I had to unpack what about their experience was different than the ones who were struggling. In our stretch ICP customers, like, was it a different value prop or use case or proficiency, self-sufficiency? I sure wish I'd had like Boaz Mayer's maturity index, that he always talks about. That thing is genius. Like those types of things to start making heads and tails of it. But that's where I always start when I would go in as a consultant. After I founded Portland Customer Success, I started with segmentation because everything I was going to do from that point forward, from a plays and playbooks perspective, from any kind of process, was going to be entirely different for a high touch versus a tech touch customer. And so I needed to lay out that landscape first. So that's what I would do. And then I would use that to start. I would use this tool, had I had it, to start really getting into more of the details on the ins and outs and the daily behavior.
So Andrew, building on that, you've been around for a long time. But how do you go about, when you think about the activities that you as a leader have to walk in and do? Are you sitting down with your team and sort of pulling information out of them in those first sessions? Are you going out and talk to customers? How are you guys getting the actual information that you need to inform these decisions?
I'm talking to my team. I'm talking to team leaders. I'm talking to leaders in other organizations. I'm talking to customers. Right? We always talk about how important it is to not approach customer success from an inside out perspective. Outside in, customers are very important. I've been in situations where I've said, we've come into an opportunity where we're using our methodology, and I said, listen, I want to talk to sales and marketing, and I want to talk to the provisioning team in operations, and I've had initial pushback from the C-suite who's brought me in saying, why this is a customer success thing. Like, no, we need to talk to everybody, right? We need to understand the customer acquisition strategy and the expectations that are being set. And while we're not going to necessarily have influence over that, it's important that we understand that so that when we come up with that strategy, when we come up with a 90-day plan, we are aware of any deficiencies or gaps that exist and do everything we can to bridge those gaps, while at the same time we are trying to compile the data and the arguments for making changes in organizations that we don't necessarily have authority over.
Yeah, you said we don't have influence. We actually do have influence. We don't have control.
We don't have control.
So,
but the only way we're going to influence them is not going back to them and saying, I kind of feel like this is an issue. We got to go back to them and say, I've got some facts here. I've got some data here. I've got, from teams that are on the ground that are actually delivering this to the customers that are experiencing it. And this is what they're saying. And this is why we need to work together. We need to collaborate and make this a better experience for everybody. Because at the end of the day, your customer doesn't sit there and say, oh, it was the marketing team, it was the sales team, it was a customer success team, and the operations teams that failed me. It's your logo that failed me. And you're all the same organization. And you all need to be customer focused and be focused on making sure that the customers are getting the best experience. And that takes everybody playing well and collaborating together, which goes back to one of the main reasons why that customer success engagement blueprint is something that's a shareable and collaboration point.
I think, just to kind of to play off of that, because I totally agree, Andrew. I think what we need to identify, if I'm a new CS leader and I'm coming in and I'm talking to the CEO or whoever that is going to hire me into this new company, I want to be perfectly clear with that person that customer success is a culture. It is not just an organization. It's a culture, and it's going to be cross-departmental, and I'm going to have some level of access to every nook and cranny in the enterprise to be able to change that culture. Our job in CS leadership is to shepherd that culture and work collaboratively, to Andrew's point and everything else. But when we think of it as a function of the business, like an account manager, we miss what customer success actually is at its core. It's a corporate culture and business growth strategy that happens to have an organization and job titles and things like that as well. Same thing like with Scrum. When I was a certified Scrum Master, I couldn't implement Scrum in my IT department without changing everything about the IT department. You couldn't be agile, kinda, if you wanted to really be doing Scrum.
Yeah.
Same thing with customer success. You can't do customer success and be customer centric all at the bottom of the funnel, being that hero. That doesn't change anything to Andrew's point. It's about the logo. You are one big family, and they don't care that it was marketing or sales or CS or support.
It's a culture. It's an organization. It's a role, right? That's what.
So, Jay, back to your question, and probably more fundamental than a lot of the sort of the thesis that we each have, and we can espouse for hours. The blueprint, and the reason why we haven't dropped it yet, is one of the things that I'm working on. As you can see, from the graphic that we're sharing, this is our sample example, right? And so it doesn't fit everybody in terms of the way it's currently laid out. And that's because this is for an example company called Comco, which is, any good consultant will tell you, you need a sample company, you need to talk about where they're at and what they were looking to accomplish. And that's why, when you're looking at this, you see there's a 120-day success plan, and, and it's laid out right now, like fairly unreasonably. You would die trying to implement this in that time frame. What we're going to work on doing, and what I'm going to do, is I'm going to create several different iterations of this that start from different levels in a department's maturity. And we're going to, make some assumptions about what that means based on our own maturity model. But we'll talk about and we'll flesh out the inputs that you need to gather to get started very succinctly. In terms of the way this works right now, we really follow sort of more of a consultative approach, which involves pulling in all the different areas and really understanding sort of where things are currently and what they look like. And that's not, as I embark on trying to teach this, because this was really pulled together. We have a pitch in front of a university for an executive certificate program that basically was around teaching CS leaders how to build an organization. And so this was kind of fundamental to it. But obviously then COVID happens, right? And executive certificate programs, they're not getting launched. And so instead, what I want to do is take this and put it out there and teach it. We're going to do it through a variety of different means. Some will be videos of me walking through the different things. We might do some conversations, hopefully, on Gain, Grow, Retain around the different, steps and elements in it. But we're going to really roll out the full life cycle for this, and we're going to make it very clear on where to start. If you're trying to revamp an existing organization, your initial steps are going to be far different than if you're trying to build from scratch. And so, as you kind of look at what's up on the screen right now, for this particular example, the place to start would be looking at, the whole culture, the roles, the mission, the purpose, how are we measured, all those sorts of inputs come first before we start talking about segmentation, ideal customer profile. Now, that's not to say that, we're not going to address all those things, but there's a measured approach to really understanding where you're at foundationally. And this assumes that you have a team that is, that in this example, that is performing well, but is kind of folding under the pressure. They don't feel like they're respected for the efforts that they're doing. They're playing whack-a-mole a lot. There's not clear roles. There's no career path. So, this is predicated on a series of known issues. And so, the starting point for almost any one of these engagements was, what are the issues? What are the challenges? Let's bring that to the table. That's the core thing. And so trying to diagnose that, if you're the leader and you're basically putting this together, your approach is going to be different. You're probably not going to go and interview all these different functional areas. You're going to do some soul searching. You're going to talk to a couple of the different functional areas that you work with, and you're going to talk with your staff about, what are the key challenges? How are we feeling? What's the current state of affairs? Are we achieving what we set out to do? If not, why? Is what we're trying to do the right thing? So we're going to create some examples and starting points and give folks what I hope to be an 80% solution that gives them, if not a paint by numbers, something that gets them in the area, fairly rapidly, so that they can start to look at what's underpinning each one of these cards and the different things that they need to do. We want to make it straightforward and we want to make it actionable.
Yep.
I think that answers Joshua's follow-up question pretty well.
I like Tanya's question.
Yeah, you want to talk about the Jedi program?
Yeah, so the Jedi program is pretty far in the evolution, and it actually is credited to
Star Wars. Star Wars.
Well, obviously the name comes from that, but it was a conversation that I had with the chief operating officer that I was working with at Zenefits around, the challenges that we were facing with scaling folks up. And, in that instance, we were adding, like 60 people every 90 days. And so training and creating functional staff was a huge challenge. And so he was talking about an approach that he had seen, and it was an oil and gas based problem. So when you put out one of those huge oil refineries, it takes hundreds and hundreds of people to actually stand one up and to make it actually deliver on the promise of that the investment was made in. The challenge is when you create another refinery, you have to do the whole thing over again. You can't just move staff from one to the other. And so the Jedi program was this really interesting idea, and I actually don't know exactly who implemented it first, so I'm not going to take credit for it, and I can't point you to who did it first. But what they did is they built one refinery. They invested 3 years in getting the staff up and running and basically stressed operational excellence, which is what Andrew alluded to. Right thing, right time, every time. And they got it to the point where they just had it dialed. During that 3-year period, they were building another refinery, and they were locating staff to go and man that refinery. And what they did is they created this program. They didn't call it the Jedi program, but essentially he was a Star Wars fan, so that was where he went. And what they did is they took on-the-job training and shadowing to a whole new level. So they basically certified each one of the best folks in what they did, and then they took them and they took, for a period of over a year, the person that was going to take the same job in the refinery, and they paired them up, much like you would have a Jedi to a Padawan. And their job was to basically create a carbon copy of themselves. And they were incented to do that. They were paid for it. And what the core of the Jedi program is if you're rapidly scaling and you're trying to build people up, it's not run them through, a 10-day indoctrination period and then have them shadow folks. It was literally, you are going to learn how to do this from the ground up. And I'm the person responsible for teaching you that, my Padawan. And, and that was the concept of the Jedi program. And so what it meant was that the team was very focused on creating the next generation. And it was baked into the entire culture of the team and the company as a whole to basically incent the behavior they were looking for, which is to create operationally excellent employees.
It reminds me of like the whole guild concept of a master and an apprentice, right? So that's a really cool concept. So that's the idea is built into the way you all think about enablement for CSMs. Is that?
And what it did do too, Jay, is it gave you the ability to hire entry-level staff, because so many folks out there are always searching for this unicorn CSM that knows everything and knows about their business, and they're searching for 120, 180 days to find one resource. Instead, what this program allows you to do, this approach, is hire a handful or more, and you have a program that's created to bring the entry-level staff in and to train them to create that unicorn that you're looking for. And, from our perspective, like one of the reasons why I love this concept is that, we really want to focus on job creation, and we want to get more folks into the customer success career market. But one of the hardest things for these folks to do is to break into the role, because nobody wants to hire entry-level people that they have to train. And it's, it's a variety of reasons, but this sort of a program, whether it's an apprenticeship program or a Jedi program, it gives you the ability to create jobs and to bring in folks that you might not otherwise hire because they lack experience, and build the type of, resources that you need, which is, it's a good thing for the industry as a whole. But it's a really good thing for a company because it also builds just this incredible loyalty.
Right. You're teaching somebody a skill they didn't have before, and you're able to have people come from all walks of life and join this profession, which I think is cool. I'm going to switch us real quickly to a question that Gavin asked. It's probably going to be the last one we have time for, unless anybody else has questions. I encourage you to go ahead and pop them in here now. But the question is, and he sort of talks here about, as a customer success leader, a strong emphasis being a cross-functional leader. We've touched on that already a little bit. But from a tooling perspective, is the toolkit that you guys are publishing here, does it have some tools to help you in not only the actions you need to take, but how to actually speak to different stakeholders? Can you utilize these tools to go have those conversations around the organization to gain the alignment that you need to gain for your plan?
Absolutely. So, the customer success is a team sport, right? Like, we all know that. And if you don't have the support that you need from the other functional areas that you rely on, then you have to figure out how you can make that happen. And so a big part of this is looking at how you weave what you're doing into the rest of the organization. And it's also about basically, like, at the core of the engagement blueprint is who's responsible for what, and how are we going to measure whether they're successful or not. And so what it does is it highlights, like, if sales is responsible for this and we're not seeing it getting done, then we know who we need to go and talk to, but it's incumbent upon us to not come with a problem. We should come with a solution, observations that are irrefutable, and a solution. And part of that is really, it's about getting folks to acknowledge that there is an issue, and that's why you have the irrefutable proof. And then the solution is about, how can we work together to make it so that this portion of the engagement goes according to the plan that we've laid out. And that's when you roll in the different tools that you can utilize for that, whether it be training, what have you. An expectation of sales setting through training that was built for CS is probably not realistic. So instead, what you have to do is you have to meet them where they're at, right? So you have to be able to frame what you're attempting to accomplish in a language and in a way that is accepted by the organization that you're relying on. And there's that's an art form, right? But it is a common problem. It's very hard to sit down with a head of marketing and tell them, look, you're marketing a product that we can't deliver, right? So like your irrefutable evidence would be, we have this catalog of features and we know which ones get used, and here's the ones where we have the most issues with. And this kind of comes back to one of the early steps of kind of working through these types of problems. I favor jobs to be done. And that's basically like you devolve your entire product down to a set of jobs, and then you try and map that to the features and the way that it's utilized, but also how it's marketed and sold. So you can say like, hey, we're marketing a BI product, but people only want to use it to basically populate a dashboard that gets thrown up on a plasma screen that's behind me, showing me that my NPS is, 80. And if we're marketing it as this whole thing and people aren't using it for that purpose, we need to adjust what we're doing. And so it's about being able to have that amount of proof that you need to be able to sway their opinion. You have to assume that they're going to push back as soon as you raise a challenge. And that's where the solution comes in. You're like, hey, proof is right here. This is what we're seeing. Here's what I recommend that we do. And here's what it's going to require of your functional area. And here's how I'm going to support you. And so it's about being a good partner. It's going to take a lot of work on your part to make it happen, but the investment is worthwhile.
Absolutely. Okay. Great answer. So I think we're getting toward the end of our time here. I think the idea is that as you guys begin to release these materials, we're going to drive some conversation about them on the Gain, Grow, Retain community, right? So we'll have some links for that. How will this stuff be released? And then I'm going to maybe give that one to you, Todd, and then we'll turn it over to Andrew and let him close us out.
Sure. So the way that we're going to release this is we're going to put together the blueprints that I alluded to in my, my previous little section, and we're going to drop those as part of basically a small course around this is the blueprint, here's what's involved in it, here's how to use it. And so, we're currently in the throes of recording all those right now. So we're going to be dropping these, it's probably going to be mid next month before we drop the first one. And then we're going to be dropping them as a series. And so we're going to kind of march you through the way that we would approach using this. And so that means you're going to be seeing at a regular cadence the different elements of this with an explanation that goes along with it, as a free course, kind of trying to get you to wrap your head around it, and then access to the actual resource itself. At the same time, we'd love to be doing some conversations around, the elements as they come out on Gain, Grow, Retain, because one of the big challenges when you release something like this is, great, I've got it, now what? So first one to come out will be the blueprint and the explanation around that. And then, following that up, we'll kind of march through the different things as they make sense. Not like, hey, we're going to put out the engagement blueprint next, because it's not the next thing that you need to work on. And so our hope is to get everything publicly available and well understood before the end of this year. And, certainly we want to do more conversations. We'll ramp up the speed at which we put this out, but it's also going to be part of, some of the leadership training that we're doing, and some of the other aspects. And, I'll be candid, as we drop these, the explanations and the sort of the course element that goes along with it are going to be fairly high level and explanatory. Because, as I taught this, it was a 9-hour introduction to this. And, it's not quick. And there's a lot of concepts to grab.
So we don't want to just drop tools on people's laps that they're not equipped to use. Got it.
Right. And so the blueprint is fairly straightforward, and the things that are underpinning it are things that people can do, right out of the gate. And that's the beauty of this, is we wanted to make it so that you can get into it really rapidly.
Very good. Awesome. All right, Andrew, we'll kick it to you, buddy.
Excellent. Todd, can you stop the screen share?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So we're at the end of our first CS Leader Roundtable. I think it went well, but it's not what I think. It's what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback and comments on LinkedIn and tagging us. We have always been, feedback from the folks that we serve, whether they're, customers, direct customers of ours, or the community that we're trying to serve, has always been important to us. So we welcome all of that. I want to thank Jay for amusing us and helping us with the launch of this new series. Thank you so much, Jay. And by the way, Shari says that I shouldn't let you get away with the age comment, but I know
I didn't say anything about old. I didn't say anything about old, just to be fair, Sherry.
But I once again, we very much appreciate you taking time out of your schedule, both for our prep call as well as for this. We understand your time's very valuable, so we do appreciate that. One final note, great CS leaders know they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. And that's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, why our CSM Mastermind is so popular, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. So once again, we hope you got something out of this discussion, and we'll see you at our next event on February 17th, when we'll discuss best practices for launching a customer advisory board with an amazing group of panelists. So once again, check out successcoaching.co to find out more and sign up. Until we see you again, have a great rest of your day, week, and month. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. And good day.